Jana Ballabha Girivarathari Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivarathari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivarathari Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivarathari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Randana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Randana Yashoda Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Tira Banachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivarathari Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivarathari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Randana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Randana Yashoda Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Tira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Rajuvacha Nidanam Upakateshu Vishnivojeshu Sarirata Yutapeshu Mukhya Satu Katam Avishishta Udavoyad Darirapi Tatyaja Akritim Trayadisha Rajuvacha Nidanam upakateshu Vrishnibojeshu Arirata Yutapa Yutapeshu Mukhya Satu Katama Vishista Udavoyad Darirapi Tatyaja Akritim Trayadisha Raja Uvacha. The king inquired. Nidhanam, destruction. Upagateshu, having overtaken. Vrishni, of the Vrishni dynasty. Bojeshu, the Boja dynasty. Adirata, great commander. Actually, when they rate commanders, at least in the Vedic text, they have different levels of commanders. They have Maharata, Ekarata, and Adirata. So Maharata is one who can fight with thousands of warriors at one time, and an Adirata is meant to be one who can fight with unlimited. There's just, we see that Arjuna was rated as an Adirata, also Bhishma was rated as an Adirata. They could fight with just unlimited, so sort of bring it on. As many as wanted to challenge them, they could fight with them. We see it many times, especially with Bhishma Dev, there was many times described in the Mahabharata how he was fighting with virtually unlimited number of warriors, thousands upon thousands at once, and defeating them all. So an Adirata is a very, very great commander. Yutapa, commander-in-chief. Yutapeshu, amongst them. Mukhya, prominent. Sa, he. Tu, only. Katam, how. Avishishta, remained. Udhava, Udhava. Yat, whereas. Hari, the personality of Godhead. Api, also. Tatyaje, finished. Akirtim, complete pastimes. Trayadisha, the Lord of the three worlds. So these I think there's about 4 or 5 verses here where it's referring to Krishna winding up his pastimes and how his winding up his pastimes is not like an ordinary person leaving this world. And we know that when an ordinary person leaves this world, generally that's not a very pleasant condition. I've had the experience of seeing a number of people leave this world. And sometimes it's a reasonably decent situation, but most of the time it's not very pleasant at all for them or for those who are observing. But here, the point that's being made here, first off in this verse here, it's establishing who Krishna is. Is explaining, especially in this last verse, it says Hari api yaja akirtim trayadisha. So it says Dhari, but this is the way I understand that works is a conjunction of 2 words, the yad and the dari. It's Hariya api tatyaja akirtim trayadisha. So trayadish means that person who's the Lord of the 3 worlds. And obviously there's only one person who's the Lord of the 3 worlds, and that's Krishna. So what's going on here in this verse is that the king, Parikshit, is establishing here that this is talking, that he's asking the question about Krishna, just so it's very clear who's being referred to. And yeah, we'll go over the translation. The king inquired, at the end of the pastimes of the Lord of the 3 worlds, Sri Krishna, and after the disappearance of the members of the Vrishni and Bhoja dynasties, who were the best of the great commanders? Why did Uddhava alone remain? So this is also, these verses, the next 4 or 5 verses are going to be talking about the mission of Uddhava. It wasn't like, Krishna just left and, left into his own devices. No, actually Krishna had given him instruction. Krishna wanted him to achieve a particular task. Purport. According to Sri Jiva Goswami, Nidhanam or Nidhanam means the transcendental abode of the Lord. Ni means the highest, and Dhanam means opulence. And because the abode of the Lord is the highest manifestation of transcendental opulence, his abode can therefore be called Nidhanam. Apart from the grammatical elucidation, the real purpose of the word Nidhanam is to indicate that all the members of the Vrishni and Bhoja dynasties were direct associates of the Lord. And after the end of his pastimes, all the associates were dispatched to their respective positions in the transcendental abode. So you can see here just this one word, that Prabhupada's translated in the transliteration as destruction. But here he's giving the explanation of Jiva Goswami, indicating how Nidhanam means the transcendental abode or the greatest opulence, but also indicating that all the associates of the Lord, the Vrishnis, the Bhojas, the Andakas, the Dasaras, there's so many, millions of personalities, had descended. When Krishna descended, it's just like, I remember some years ago being in France and going down the Loire Valley, and this is called the Valley of Kings. And one of the reasons being is because all the previous kings have built all their chateaus along this valley, and there's many, many beautiful chateaus there. And what used to happen was, the king would build a chateau that him and his whole entourage would live there for some time, and meanwhile another chateau, actually several chateaus, there was always a sequence of chateaus being built. And then when they tired of that chateau, when the other one was built, the whole court would just move to the next chateau, and they just go on like that. And there's many, many amazing places there. And so we can see how in this situation, how a king with his whole retinue would move from one place to the next. But actually, when Krishna comes, it's not just his whole retinue; his whole planet comes. Many millions of personalities. So all these, members of the Yadu dynasties, the Bhoja dynasty, the Andakas, the Dasaras, so many dynasties who were there, the Yadus, they're all actually Krishna's eternal associates. And it describes in the Mahabharata also how that before Krishna was preparing, or when Krishna was preparing to appear in this world, that all his eternal associates came down before him. Not all of them, but many of his eternal associates came down before him to prepare things for him, just like his mother and father. They're Krishna's eternal associates. So in order to serve Krishna in that capacity, they also came down before him. And we see the same as in the pastimes in all of Krishna's pastimes when he descends to this world, that his associates descend with him to perform these wonderful transcendental pastimes with him. So this is kind of, it gives an interesting analysis to show us how, like if you look at English is a very sort of particular language, and one word means one thing. But it's kind of interesting in English. It's like you can have words that are differently spelt, but sound the same. Like you look at the bough of a tree, or a bow, or when someone bows, and it's very similar words, or similar pronunciation, but different meanings. So English can be a little bit confusing sometimes, especially if you don't know the context of how a word's being used. But with Sanskrit, it's such an interesting language in that there are many different meanings that can be extracted from different words. And a lot of it's going to depend on how the word's being used, but also the actual situation that's being described. And we see that sometimes when people translate Sanskrit, especially persons who are not devotees, they don't get the context of how the words are being used. So they tend to translate words very much in a, as Prabhupada would call it, an ABCD fashion. A means this, B means this, C means this, therefore this means that. And so when Prabhupada was questioned by his leaders not long, in 1977 when he was preparing to leave this world, they questioned him. The BBT questioned him about, well, how will the translations go on? And Srila Prabhupada explained that they must be realized translations, not ABCD translations. Meaning that the person has to understand the nature of the text, the nature of the persons who are being discussed. It's just like this section here is talking about how Krishna leaves this world. Now, if someone doesn't have realization of the nature of Krishna, then they're going to think that Krishna is leaving this world just like anyone else. And that, he's leaving a material body behind. He must be the same as everyone else. They're going to misinterpret the situation. But we see here the acharyas that they'll explain how actually this wasn't Krishna's original transcendental form. This was a manifestation of the universal form, because the universal form is temporary. And so someone who's actually a devotee of Krishna, and I mentioned someone who's actually a devotee of Krishna will understand the deeper elements of these pastimes. And I've quoted this story a number of times. Prabhupada quotes this story, and I just found it quite a profound story. Prabhupada talks about this book called Shah Jahan, and there was a conversation going on between the author of the book Shah Jahan, which I think his name was D.L. Roy, and another, his friend. And he gave his friend the book to read, and his friend said, well, I don't understand why you call the book Shah Jahan, because it's not about Shah Jahan, it's all about Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb was the son of Shah Jahan. And then D.L. Roy explained, he said, no, actually, I called it Shah Jahan because this book is actually all about the sufferings of Shah Jahan. How, when his wife Mumtaz died, how he suffered about, and he built the Taj Mahal for her, and things like that. And then when Aurangzeb killed his brother and he imprisoned his father, and all his abominable activities he performed, because Shah Jahan was quite a wicked person. And so all the abominable activities he performed, his father was hearing about this and suffering. And so the whole time, he's hearing all about the activities of Aurangzeb, and he's suffering greatly while he's in prison. So this is why he called the book Shah Jahan. So the point I'm getting to there is that actually the author can understand what the book is about, because he's got the intent. So Prabhupada uses this to demonstrate that in the same way, only a devotee can actually understand the pastimes of Krishna. And Krishna explains, he says, Ham prakasha savasya yogamaya samavata, that I don't reveal myself to the foolish and the unintelligent. Only a devotee can understand. There was this bhakti mama vijananti yavan yaschasmi. Only a devotee can understand, through devotion, can actually understand the pastimes of Krishna. So similarly, the way this word is being used, a devotee can understand this because of their devotion. And also, it's not just about, okay, this verb means this means this means that, therefore it means that. It also, as we see, it comes from realization as well. Because of their realization of the nature of Krishna, they're able to understand what is actually being explained here. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur elucidates the meaning of akirtam as pastimes. A means complete, and kirtam means transcendental pastimes. Since the Lord is identical with his transcendental body, there is no question of his changing or quitting his body. So again, we see that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is pointing this out. He's winding up his complete pastimes. They're not like, some ordinary or mundane activity in this material world, but actually, actually his pastimes are extraordinary. You read the Krishna book, for instance. Some of the things that Krishna was performing, even before he could crawl, he was killing demons. There's one demon called the Sakat Asura, or the cart demon. So there's a demon who's disguised himself as a cart. Mother Yasoda had put Krishna down underneath the cart, to shade him from the sun, because there was a festival going on, and she wanted to participate in the festival, so she put Krishna down. under the cart, but Krishna knew that this was a cart demon, so he had caused his mother to feel tired holding him, and so it caused her to put him under the cart. So then he's under the cart and he kicked the cart and killed the demon. So even as a baby, he's performing these extraordinary pastimes. And saying here, since the Lord is identical with his transcendental body, there is no question of his changing or quitting his body. And this is like, for a devotee, they can actually understand this, how Krishna doesn't quit his body or change his body. Because why? Because it's Satchidananda Vigraha. It's an eternal form that's full of knowledge and bliss. It's not a temporary, like these material bodies. They're temporary. They're full of ignorance. I mean, all you have to do, if you want to, understand how the body's full of ignorance, just, when you go to the bathroom in the morning, you can understand it's full of ignorance. It's like a very, very gross manifestation of matter. And you'll experience this more and more as you get older, and you see how the body stops functioning. And if you want to hear about the glories of the material body, just spend some time with Krishna Kirtan Prabhu. He can tell you all about the glories of having a material body. It's a very difficult situation. It causes great suffering. But the Lord's form is not like our form. It's completely different. It's, as I mentioned, it's eternal, it's full of knowledge, and it's very blissful. To act in accordance with the rules and customs of the material world, the Lord seems to take birth or leave his body. But the pure devotees of the Lord know well the actual fact. It is necessary, therefore, for the serious student of the Srimad Bhagavatam to follow the notes and comments of the great acharyas like Jiva Goswami and Vishwanath Chakravarti. To others who are not devotees of the Lord, the comments and explanations of such acharyas may appear to be grammatical jugglery, but to the students who are in line of disciplic succession, the explanations of the great acharyas are quite fit. So this is also quite interesting that Srila Prabhupada is instructing us to study the commentaries of the acharyas. He's not saying, just study my books, don't study anything else. He's actually saying that we need to understand these commentaries of the acharyas, because the acharyas aren't saying anything different, and we see that Prabhupada is not saying anything different from what the acharyas are saying. But there's just different nuances. They bring out different points of the that are being explained in the verses, etc. And even we'll see, because Prabhupada's commentary here is very much, as we see in this first paragraph, he's quoting from Jiva Goswami. In the second paragraph, he's quoting from Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. And in the next verse, he'll mention that because Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Jiva Goswami give very, very long elaboration on the next verse, because what they're trying to do and what they're doing in the next verse is pointing out how they're explaining it with many references from scriptures, how Krishna's appearance and activities aren't like an ordinary person, how they're completely transcendental. But Prabhupada doesn't quote them because they give, doesn't quote them extensively because they're very, very long. And he mentions that, well, I didn't want to increase the volume of the book, and Jiva Goswami's commentary is several pages long. It's a very, very interesting commentary. The word upagateshu is also significant. All the members of the Vrishni and Bhoja directly reach the abode of the Lord. Other devotees do not reach the abode of the Lord directly, but the pure associates of the Lord have no attraction for the opulence of any planets in the material world. Sometimes, due to inquisitiveness, devotees who are to be promoted to the abode of the Lord have some attraction for the opulence of the higher material planets above the earth, and thus they desire to see them while going up to the perfection. But the Vrishnis and Bhojas were directly dispatched because they had no attraction for material planets. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur also suggests that according to the Amarakosh dictionary, Akriti also means signal. Lord Krishna ordered Uddhava by signal to go to Badrikashram after his departure, and Uddhava, as a pure devotee of the Lord, carried out the order more faithfully than going back to Godhead or the abode of the Lord. That was the cause of his remaining alone, even after the departure of the Lord from the face of the earth. So, as I mentioned previously, this verse is the big, like, when I look at the verses in, or, a verse to speak on, I also try to look at the structure and how the chapter's evolving. And so we'll see here in this chapter, for instance, it started off with how well, actually in the previous chapters we see how Maitreya and Uddhava, they met with Krishna when he was in the forest and preparing to leave this world, and Uddhava had received wonderful transcendental instructions from Krishna, and then Krishna departed from this world. Maitreya was nearby. He also heard these instructions, but the instructions were actually directed at Uddhava, and Krishna had requested Uddhava to go to Badrika Ashram. And then so Vidura met with Uddhava as he was on the way to Badrika Ashram, and he heard that Uddhava had been there when Krishna departed. And so he had asked Uddhava about Krishna. And Uddhava shared with him some, he discussed some pastimes of Krishna, Krishna's pastimes inside, when he was in Vrindavan, also some of Krishna's pastimes out of Vrindavan. But when Uddhava had, when Vidura had asked Uddhava to go deeper, then Uddhava, out of separation for Krishna, he just said, no, I can't speak anymore, I have to go. But one thing he did share with Vidura is that actually that Krishna had asked me to share these instructions with you, so I've shared them with you, now I have to go. And then Vidura, he was overwhelmed when he heard that Krishna was thinking about him, because Krishna was the light of his life, so to speak. It was just everything for both these personalities. So then he instructed Vidura to go and see Maitreya. And this is what's about to happen. And then we see that Uddhava, he's going to head north to Badrika Ashram to meet with Narayana Rishi. And in the in the subsequent verses, we'll see that, and this is the start of it, of the explanation. In the subsequent verses, is explaining that the reason why Uddhava was requested to remain behind, because the rest of Krishna's family have already gone back to the spiritual realm, and we see that, and this will be, I think it's mentioned in the next verse about the pastime of when Samba and some of the boys, they had dressed themselves up. I think they dressed Samba up as a woman, and cloth over the head, and I think they stuffed some clothes or something underneath her belly, his belly, to make him look like he was pregnant. And then they went to Narad Muni and these other rishis in a joking spirit, asked the rishis, what will this beautiful young woman give birth to? And then they said that the rishis, I mean, externally it appears like it was out of anger, but we can actually understand this was Krishna's arrangement. So the thing is, like, when we're looking at the pastimes of the Lord, we can't just look at it in terms of the external appearance. We have to try to understand the deeper meaning behind these things. And this is where the non-devotees really miss out, is they don't understand the deeper meaning of Krishna's pastimes. They don't understand that how all these things are happening by the arrangement of Krishna, and that through his will, through his desire, he is performing many different pastimes for his own pleasure, for the pleasure of his devotees. And to show, we see, just like with the story in the first canto, how Yudhisthira, after the war at Kurukshetra, Yudhisthira was just besides himself with grief and lamentation, because he was feeling that so many people had been killed just to put him on the throne. So he felt like he was the greatest of all sinners, and that he'd rather just give up his life and not manage the kingdom. But we understand it was Krishna's desire that the Pandavas be installed on the throne. Therefore, it was actually his duty to take on the role of the king, the emperor of the world. But Krishna tried to convince him of this, and he couldn't be convinced. Even Vyasadeva tried to convince him of this, and he couldn't be convinced. But then it happened that the time was coming for Bhishma Dev to leave this world, and so Krishna encouraged Yudhisthira to go and hear from Bhishma Dev. And so he did that and became convinced. So does that mean that Bhishma Dev's knowledge or his power of being able to convince Yudhisthira was greater than that of Vyasa? The person who actually wrote the Vedas down? Does that mean that Bhishma Dev was a greater person than even Krishna himself? No, it's the pastimes of Krishna. Krishna is making these arrangements so that his devotee, his great devotee Bhishma, can be glorified. He's also making these arrangements so that he can be there when Bhishma Dev is leaving his body, and Bhishma can be gazing upon the Lord's beautiful form as he gives up his body. So we see that Krishna makes many, many wonderful arrangements simply for his own pleasure and for the pleasure of the Vaishnavas and for the glorification of the Vaishnavas. So a non-devotee can't understand these things. We see what's going on here. A non-devotee cannot understand what was happening with the so-called destruction of the Yadus, and this is what's discussed right in the beginning of this chapter, the destruction of the Yadu dynasty. But actually, it's not the destruction of the Yadu dynasty; it's the winding up, it's withdrawing the Yadu dynasty from this material world. And so Krishna created this situation where Samba goes there in the guise of in the disguise of a young woman who's supposedly pregnant. The sages, they pronounce a curse, because it's also, as Prabhupada's talking out here, following social norms. Because these young men should not have been making fun of the sages. Very, very, very disrespectful. Extremely disrespectful, especially Narad Muni and other great personalities like that. They're playing a joke on them. So this is Krishna's most likely Yogamaya potency is deluding them into this act. That they're acting in such a way that they're being disrespectful to these great sages. And Narad Muni is not again not an ordinary personality. A non-devotee is going to look at this and think, look at him, he's getting angry. But no, Narad Muni, he's a great facilitator of the pastimes of Krishna. We see so many times he's acting in a way to facilitate or to speed up the pastimes of Krishna, just like when Devaki and Vasudeva were being detained by Kamsa because he was worried about their 8th child was going to kill him, so he wanted to kill that child. But then Narad Muni came and said, well, but you're waiting for the 8th child to come, but you don't know, it could be any of the children. You believe a voice in the sky? It could be any of the children that's going to come and kill you. So based on that, he then imprisoned Vasudeva and Devaki, and he killed every child. But actually, Narad understood also that the persons who were entering into Devaki's womb, because of their past activities, they were meant just to enter into the womb and then be killed and return back to the spiritual abode. So he acted to facilitate their return to the spiritual abode, but also to speed up Krishna's descent. So Narad Muni also is there in Dwarka, and Samba comes, and then Narad Muni pronounces a curse. He says, this person will give birth to a lump of iron that will be the destruction of this dynasty. So again, and this is the point I feel that's being brought out here, is that only a devotee can really understand the nature of Krishna's pastimes. Only a devotee, and not just any devotee, but an advanced devotee. We see, like, Prabhupada's quoting Jiva Goswami and Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, these greatly elevated acharyas, can really understand what's going on in Krishna's pastimes, because they're very, very deep. It's just like, in the material world, it's not very difficult to understand people. It's not very difficult to understand what they're doing and what their motivations are. We find that the majority of people in this world are motivated by sense gratification. Very, very transparent. It's very easy to understand what the motive are. Why people are so active, why people, make these big buildings and all this technology and all this machinery and stuff like that. Why they have airports and planes and the whole thing. Simply because of sense gratification. Simply because they want to expand their enjoyment in this world. But the same can't be said about the devotees. The same can't be said about Krishna. It mentions in one scripture, Vaishnaveda Kriya Mudya Vigena Bhujai. It's very difficult to understand the activities of a Vaishnava, especially for someone who's a non-devotee. And we see also here, even in the 17th verse, Uddhava is saying to Krishna that, you've consulted me as a counselor, and you've acted as if you've been bewildered, as if you're bewildered, and this bewilders me. I can't understand this. Why you're consulting me? You're the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we see that Uddhava is even saying, I don't understand your pastimes. We look back in the first canto, and Kunti says, Maya Javanikachanam, that it's like you're covered by this deluding potency, this curtain, this Javanikacha, this deluding curtain. This is bewildering to me. I don't understand. And she's a great devotee, and Prabhupada elaborates on her as a charya. Uddhava was practically the same as Krishna. He was such an advanced devotee that when Krishna wanted to send a messenger to Vrindavan, to the residents of Vrindavan, he sent Uddhava. And when they first saw Uddhava, they thought it was Krishna. He's such an elevated person, so close to Krishna. And then we see also with Bhishmadev, when he's lying on the bed of arrows and he's offering prayers to Krishna, he's talking about Krishna's wonderful pastimes and how bewildered he is by Krishna's pastimes. So we see that even these great personalities, they admit how they're bewildered by Krishna's pastimes, how he appears to act like an ordinary person, even though he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They see this as bewildering. So how, if these great devotees find it bewildering, how are ordinary people going to understand the pastimes of Krishna? They can't. They just interpret it in a mundane way. They interpret it in a material way. And they see that, Krishna, he's dancing with these young women in the forest in the middle of the night. I want to do that. This sounds like a really good thing to do. I can enjoy, with all these women. And they're just thinking it's like mundane enjoyment. They don't understand how Krishna is fulfilling the desires of these different personalities or these different devotees. So Krishna acts in many, many extraordinary ways for his own pleasure and for the pleasure of the devotees. And generally we find that, we find that people, they're bewildered by this. They don't actually understand. Therefore, it's essential that we understand these pastimes through the eyes of the acharyas. We can only understand these things through the eyes of the acharyas. Why? It's because they are free from the basic defects, from the defects we all suffer from. They don't have imperfect senses. They're not an illusion. They're not prone to cheat. What's the fourth one? Illusion, cheating, imperfect senses. Oh, they make mistakes. Yeah, they don't make mistakes. Yeah? So the jiva, the conditioned jiva, is prone to these four defects, but the eternally liberated souls, they're not prone to these defects. Therefore, if we want to understand the true nature of Krishna's pastimes, of course we can never understand the pastimes in full, but we can understand the nature of these pastimes. And if we want to understand the true nature of these pastimes, then we need to take shelter of the instructions of the acharyas. And we'll see that Prabhupada talks about this in the next few verses also, how we need to take guidance from the different acharyas in order to understand these pastimes. And we also see here in the final comments of the verse, the purport, sorry, how Prabhupada is mentioning that Krishna asked Uddhava to go to Badrikashram, and the Acharyas explained the reason he did this was because in his 125 years on the planet, Krishna didn't go to Badrikashram. And he had left a representative behind. Also, another reason he left the representative behind, because he saw that Uddhava was the only person who was qualified to preach the message of Krishna consciousness. There was no one else around who he considered was qualified. But when Shukadev came, then Shukadev was qualified. So Uddhava was in a similar category to Shukadev Goswami. And so he asked him to go to Badrikashram to meet with Narayana Rishi to give them his association, because he saw that Uddhava was as good as him. So it's very interesting, why Krishna does these various things. And as I mentioned, through the commentaries and the instructions of the Acharyas, we can actually understand why it is that Krishna acts in the way that he does. Okay, I'll finish there. Any comments or questions at all? Srimad Krishna Kirtan Prabhu.
Slightly related to your past. All these great rishis and all these associates of the Lord had to be a special arrangement for them to be destroyed. What's the difference between them and Krishna's army that was given to Duryodhana and Bhagavatam, etc.? I understand they all killed in the Bhagavatam, etc. Is that correct? Krishna's army?
Yeah.
So what's the difference of those personalities and current personalities?
Yeah, I haven't read anything. I don't recall reading anything from the Acharyas about the army specifically. So then we can understand it's probably not very important. But there is much commentary on the Vrishnis, the Boljas, Andikas, etc. They're all eternal associates of Krishna, and that was the point that Prabhupada is bringing out here. Everyone on the Balakurukshetra was liberated. Everyone who died seeing Krishna, or Arjuna, who was killed by Arjuna's arrows because Arjuna is a great devotee of Krishna, was liberated. That much is said. It doesn't go into, I have not seen any detail about individuals on Kurukshetra, so I don't know, basically. The Acharyas don't say I don't know. Have you read anything?
No, I mean, in the sense of answer to the question, they were liberated by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, because they died in front of Krishna. But there were a few like Kritavama and others who were fighting on the side of the Kauravas. They survived. There was a dozen or so people survived. There was the Pandavas and a few people, Kritavama, Kripa, Ashvatthama. Because you could read the Mahabharata how they went into because after the Battle of Kurukshetra, it was the tradition, when Krishna explained this to Yudhisthira, the tradition is that the king should go, sleep on the bank of the river for that night, not in their nice sort of tents and things like that. So they did that. The Pandavas did that with their immediate entourage, and then while they were doing that, then Kritavama and Ashvatthama and Kripa, they came and killed everyone who was remaining in the camp. And there's quite a few people still there from the Pandava side, including the 5 sleeping sons of Draupadi. And so they were all destroyed. And it's said how, it's kind of interesting how Ashvatthama became empowered, and he was just killing like a machine, thousands of people. So it seems like there was actually quite a lot of people left after the Battle of Kurukshetra, but then and Kritavama and Kripacharya, they actually stood on the outskirts of the camp and they just killed anyone who came out. But I don't know any detail about it. I'll let you know if I come across it. Anything else? Okay, thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki, Jai Nitai Gaur Premanandi.